Hi, I'm Ken. We all know the iconic British postage stamp, the penny black, and its partner, the penny red. I'm sure many of you have copies of the penny red in your collection, and most of you are also hoping for one day to get a copy of the penny black. I got mine, this one here, about a year ago. It's not a great copy, but it's one I'm really proud of and happy with. It's not a bad copy either. Anyway, along the way in our collecting journey, we come across a few of the early British Victoria stamps. And when we do, it's a nice treasure in our collection. I think that the catalog for these items is pretty specialized and a little hard to get your head wrapped around. And honestly, when I get one of these, I spend a lot of time with the catalog trying to figure out exactly what I have and where to put it in my catalog. So in my stamp album. So what I'm hoping to do with this video today is walk you through the various types of British Queen Victoria stamps, show you how they fit together in a collection, show you how to get through the catalog for these stamps, and hopefully make it a little easier on you in a way that I've found difficult in the past. Anyway, one other thing I found out about this while I was making this video, about halfway through making it, I realized it was going to be one of the longest videos I've ever made. And so I thought about breaking it up into two parts. Well, I could have broken it up into two parts, or I can accept that it's going to be longer. If I were trying to make a lot of money off this YouTube channel, I'd naturally break it into two parts because, you get more ad revenue with a two-part video. I don't care about that kind of thing. So what we're going to do is have a very long video. You are grown-up people, or maybe not so grown-up people watching this channel, and you have the ability to turn it off halfway through and start up anywhere you want. So if you want a two-parter, break it up in your own viewing and watch it in two parts. I'm not going to try and pull more ad revenue out of you by breaking this into two parts. So enjoy the ride. Let's dive into these stamps. This is my first page of British stamps. There's my penny black, the first stamp on the strip. I don't know if you know, the penny black is the first postage stamp ever issued. The woman on the stamp is Queen Victoria. She was the British monarch from 1837 to 1901. This stamp was first issued in 1840, 3 years into her reign. Every British postage stamp during her reign featured her image. That's 61 years of postage stamps, each and every one featuring this left-facing, never-aging image of the Queen. No wonder it's so hard to tell these stamps apart. There are collectors who specialize in the penny black, collecting different plate numbers, plate positions, usages, cancels. With used copies running about $100 each, that sounds like an expensive specialization to me. Most of us are lucky to get just one of these stamps. I won't dive too deeply into these, but there are some details worth mentioning for identification purposes. As the first postage stamps, you'd think this would have a catalog number of 1. In Scott, this stamp indeed has catalog number 1, but in the classic British stamp catalog, Stanley Gibbons, this stamp has 3 numbers, 1, 2, and 3. British collectors are more detailed when it comes to collecting their own stamps, as you would expect. Oh, and thank you again to the Swedish Tiger website for this and many other great images in this video. My videos wouldn't be the same without his support. Please go visit, it's a fantastic website for British and US stamp information. Anyway, these are the 3 stamps listed in the Stanley Gibbons catalog. The number 1 stamp is listed as intense black, the number 2 is listed as just black, and the number 3 is gray black with a little note that says worn plate. It turns out that these aren't 3 different stamp releases. They're all the same stamp in different stages of the life cycle of the plates. As the plates wore, they held less ink, which resulted in these shade differences. My penny black is most likely officially the number 2 stamp, but I think it's fair to still think of it as the first postage stamp. When looking at a penny black, the most common features of quality are the cancel clarity, how it does or doesn't obscure the image, and the number of clean margins on the stamp. Mine has 3 good margins with a little cut out of the top right corner. It's actually pretty good. These stamps only came in perforated like this one. They were cut out of sheets by hand with scissors, so getting a perfectly centered stamp with 4 clean margins is rare. The cancel in my stamp is called a Maltese cross. You can often tell in which town the stamp was canceled by the particulars of the shape of the cross. My cancel is black, and that's the most common color, with red next, but they also come in blues, purples, yellow, and even white. The Spellman Museum has one on display in the rare yellow color. It's less important in identifying these stamps, but notice the stars in the upper corners and the letters in the lower corners. In later stamps, this changes around a bit, but I thought I'd point it out here first. The letters in the lower corners indicate the position of the stamp on the sheet. These stamps were printed in sheets of 240 stamps, 20 stamps high by 12 stamps wide. The top left stamp has the letters AA, with the second letter incrementing along the top until the top right stamp with AL. The first letter is incremented with each row so that the last stamp on the sheet was TL. Some collectors try to reconstruct an entire sheet of stamps with each of the different corner letters. The Spellman has a nearly complete reconstruction like this. It's much easier to do with the more common and less expensive penny red stamps. Many collectors look for the perfect stamp that has their own initials in the corner letters, a much more achievable goal, unless your name is Vincent Rogers. Poor Vincent Rogers. Well, maybe not. VR is not completely impossible. For this stamp, the stars were replaced with the corner letters VR. This was an official stamp that was printed but never officially released. Some did slip through, though, so if Vincent Rogers has enough money, he can still get a penny black with his initials. I'm pointing out this stamp not because you're likely to get one, but because this stamp was highly forged. If you do get a penny black like this, you might just have a forgery. At least be aware when looking at penny blacks that the real ones have stars in the upper corners. Back to my stamps, though. I made a single page for my imperforate Victorian stamps. Perforated versus imperforate is the first thing to look for when you get any of these stamps. The first issues were all imperforate. These came in 3 types. The first was the penny black that we just covered. It only came imperforate, that's easy. It was replaced by the penny red. It's the exact same stamp, but in a red-brown color. That made it easier to see the cancel on used stamps. I'll talk through the various penny red types in a minute. The third type, the tuppenny blue, that's 2 penny blue for us Yanks. The tuppenny blue came out before the penny reds. This is my table of the various imperforated Victoria stamps. Notice the first section with the penny black stamps, 3 shades like we talked about. The next stamp is the blues. They came in 3 shades just like the blacks. Again, Scott only has a single number for these. There are 2 types I've listed as no lines and white lines. I'll get to that in a moment. Finally, there's the penny red section. Scott also lists all these shades and type under just 1 catalog number. Let's take a look at the tuppenny blue stamps. I have 2 columns in my table for the 2 types of blues. There are 3 shades of each, which result in 6 catalog numbers in Stanley Gibbons. Scott just has numbers for the 2 types. I think Scott has it right for these and for the penny blacks. These 2 stamps are different designs, though. The difference is subtle, I know. The engraving on the right adds 2 horizontal lines, one below the word postage and the other above the words 2 pence. The earlier stamp without the lines is 10 times as expensive as the later ones with the lines. You'll notice that I have 2 stamps with the lines, but none of those earlier stamps. There are 3 other types of tuppenny blue stamps. The first 2 are the 2 imperfs we already talked about. The third stamp is the perforated version of those. There are 6 catalog numbers for that middle stamp. 3 of them are shade differences, but hold that thought for a moment. We'll come back to that a little later. The next 2 stamps introduce 2 bigger design differences. The top corner stars are replaced with corner letters. Those letters are exactly the same as the bottom letters except swapped. On the bottom, the letters are rows and columns. On the top, the letters are columns, then rows. The 4 corner letter stamps also have plate numbers engraved in the scrollwork along the edges. I have blown those up to make that easier to see. The rightmost stamp is the old-style star corner stamp. It doesn't include a plate number. Some collectors can figure out the plate number by design details in the stars, but we won't cover that today. The second stamp has plate number 8. That's included in both edges of the stamps. The third is plate number 1. I'm only showing you the one edge. These are small and can be very hard to make out. Fortunately, you don't need to read these to identify the stamp, although some plate numbers are more valuable than others. The last 2 stamps might look the same. They both have lines and corner letters, but there is a collectible difference. It's the thickness of the lines. I think it's easier to see them on the bottom line, but it's true for both the top and bottom lines. The line on the third stamp is noticeably thinner than the line on the second stamp. I've included the star version of the stamp on the left so that you can see the full progression. While the line thickness is not needed to tell that stamp from the other two, you can see a gradual thinning of that line over time too. So there you have it, the 5 basic design types of the tuppenny blue stamp. Imperf without lines and with lines, perforated with stars, and perforated with 2 line thicknesses. There are 2 other differences that I'll cover with the penny red stamps, but just to mention them briefly, for the star version of the stamps there are 2 different perforations, 14 and 16, and within those there are 4 potential fonts used in the corner letters. These differences are pretty subtle to me. I'll talk about that when we get to the penny red stamps. Note that these alphabet differences apply to the star versions of the stamps. The 4 corner stamps use the sans serif font, and you don't need that to identify the different varieties there. We're still on page 1, and we still have those penny reds to go over. I know, my eyes are starting to gloss over. We've already gone over the imperforated versions of the penny red stamps, but let's turn the page and talk about something else for a moment to give our brains a break. Imperforate stamps were the norm for almost 50 years. The first perforated stamp was released in 1854. It was the perforated version of the penny red. But during that imperforate period, 3 other designs were issued. These are called the embossed issues because each stamp has raised areas, particularly the Queen's image, that are pressed into the underlying paper. There are 3 denominations, 1 shilling, 10 pence, and 6 pence. Yes, that seems like the wrong order, high to low, but that's the order they were released in. The 1 shilling came out in 1847. For the previous 7 years, the highest denomination stamp was 2 pence. At 12 pence to a shilling, this is a huge jump in value. This particular stamp would have been used primarily to cover overseas postage to the U.S. The 10 pence stamp came out the next year. It covered the rate to Europe. It would be another 6 years in 1854 when the 6 pence stamp was issued. It covered the rate to Belgium, which had been specifically negotiated between the 2 countries. These 3 stamps are quite rare. It's less likely that a collector will have any of these stamps in their collection than having the penny black, both because they cost about twice as much as the penny black, and, well, everyone's heard of the penny black. I'd say these 3 stamps are easy to identify, but they do have their difficulties. These stamps are quite similar in design to the embossed envelopes that had been in production for a number of years before these came out. Cut squares from those envelopes are quite common and can be easily mistaken for these stamps. The stamp on the left is the embossed stamp. The one on the right is a cut square from an envelope. The arrows point to inserts in the design that show the date of manufacture. In some cases, envelope stamps might have flower icons instead of these date numbers. There's one other thing that makes these stamp issues different. It's hard to see on the stamp on the left, but there are 2 blue threads that run the length of the stamp. Those threads are embedded in the paper as a security measure. Only the stamps have the security threads, not the envelopes. Actually, only the 1 shilling and 10 pence stamp have the blue threads. The 6 pence stamp has a VR watermark instead of the threads. This is my page for these stamps. I consider myself extremely lucky to have these examples. But look at my examples compared to the nicer copy. Mine are the 2 on the left. They are cut tight to the shape of the stamp. This severely damages the value of the stamp, which I'll say is a good thing because otherwise I wouldn't have any of these stamps in my collection. Remember that these stamps came out just 7 years into the possibility of having a stamp collection. People hadn't yet formed normal approaches to collecting stamps. At the time, it was common to cut around the image of embossed envelopes, so people did the same thing with these stamps. You'll see that I have 3 of these stamps. Stanley Gibbons lists 3 catalogued shades for the 1 shilling. I have 2 of those shades. There's only 1 listed shade for the 10 pence stamp. I have that one. And while there are 4 listed shades for the 6 pence, I don't have any of those. Given how lucky I was to get these, I don't expect I'll be adding the 6 pence stamp in the future. Good copies of these stamps are expected to be cut square and have the whole design in the square. That's actually quite hard to get. You see, these stamps were embossed onto the paper by hand, one by one. You can see the result in this block of 6-pence stamps. Notice that the stamps overlap. Because they were cut by hand at the post office using scissors, good clean cuts are hard to find. See how on the left edge the clerk had to make a bend in the cut to separate the stamps. And that's just the nature of these stamps. Are you ready to go back to the penny red stamps? I am. On this page I have my stamps that have stars in the corners and are perforated. Remember the progression from our look at the tuppenny blues? Imperfs with stars, perforated stamps with stars, then perforated stamps with 4 corner letters. This is the page for that middle group. Unfortunately, I don't have any tuppenny blues that fit on this page. There are really only 2 stamp designs that belong on this page, the penny red design and the tuppenny blue design. But altogether, Stanley Gibbons lists 27 catalog numbers for these. I didn't bother to list Stanley Gibbons number 16 because that stamp really wasn't issued and it's really too rare to ever find its way into my collection. For comparison, Scott lists 14 major numbers of these stamps, 20 if you count the minor listings. Honestly, except for a few minor differences, Scott and Stanley Gibbons agree on the broad strokes of these issues. It looks complicated, but it's not that bad once it's laid out in a table like this. Let's break it down. First, I show 4 major sections, which might look like there are 4 different stamps here. That's just a convenience for me in this table. The first 3 sections are all the 1-pence design. The last section is the 2-pence design, so that's, like I said, 2 stamp designs. I've broken the penny red stamps into 3 groups by watermark and paper type. The first grouping of stamps have a small crown watermark, and the second 2 have the large crown watermark. The tuppenny blue also came in these 2 watermarks. I didn't want to waste the space making 2 sections for it, but fortunately all the small watermark stamps are in the first 2 columns, and all the others are the large watermark copies. That was an easy label to cheat in there. Next, of course, are the various shades. I've put them in my table, but like so many of these early British stamps, the shades can be tough to distinguish without reference copies. Notice in my stamps that I've labeled many of the stamps as 37 to 41 with a question mark. Honestly, I'm just gathering these issues together until I can make a better guess at them. Let's see, rose brown, pale red, rose red, deep rose red, those all sound the same to me. Perhaps with more copies I can figure them out one day. I didn't mention the paper color issue. Notice that the second and third groupings both have large watermarks, but the second section notes a white paper. The paper in the first and second groups has a bluish tinge to it. This bluing shows up in varying degrees. The stamp on the top shows the bluing. Notice that the blue seems to be concentrated around where the ink is concentrated, sort of like a blue ghost image. The stamp on the bottom is on white paper, although with age these can look more like cream paper. Next, in that first section, there are notes that say either die 1 or die 2. There's a slight difference in the 2 designs that some say is easiest to see in the Queen's smile. Overall, die 2 is said to be sharper. It was re-engraved to show more detail in the Queen's face. You might notice that the eye of the die 2 stamp has more detail. I've called out a few other details in the bottom images. In die 1, the nostril is flat. It's been re-engraved with a slight curve. Same with the shape of the mouth, which makes the Queen look more stern in die 2. You might also notice a small divot below the Queen's lower lip in die 2. Finally, if you look in the hair, a few strands of hair have been strengthened in die 2. I'm so glad that there's all these differences because the cancel often covers up 1 or 2 of these. I think that covers the various groupings. Next is the column headings. Let's just get the easiest out of the way first, the perforations. These stamps come in 2 perforations, just 14 and 16, that's simple enough. The last item in the table is the alphabets. I almost don't want to talk about this, it's just so darn subjective. There were 4 different alphabet styles used for the bottom corner letters. I'm showing you some examples meant to help with this, but even knowing what they are, it's hard to see the differences. Apparently the first alphabet is smaller than the others, not that it matters since it was only used with the tuppenny blue stamps. With alphabet 2, the letters are chunkier and wider. Alphabet 3 makes the letters taller and more slender. Finally, alphabet 4 switched from punched letters to hand-engraved letters, which makes them inconsistent, thanks, but generally considered larger than the other letters. Knowing what I just said, can anybody make sense of it from this image? It's just hard. The Stanley Gibbons Specialized catalog has images of every letter if you need that for a specific stamp, but as much as possible you should only resort to these alphabets if all other identifications fail you. Here's my suggested approach to these stamps. First, and obviously, is it a penny red or a tuppenny blue? Let's start with the blues. Next, check the watermark and hope for a small crown. With the small crown watermarks, check the perf. It's probably easy enough to distinguish deep blue and pale blue if the perf is 16. If the watermark is a large crown, you have a bit of a problem. All the colors should be the same. First, check the perf, and you will have narrowed the stamp down to 2 in each case. Fortunately, you're left with only 2 alphabet choices, and those are the easiest to tell apart. If it's short and chunky, it's 2, and if it's taller, it's 3. Hopefully that won't be too hard. Hard enough for sure, but possible to figure out. Now let's move to the penny reds. I like to start with the watermark. With the small crowns, I'd move next to the die type, then the perforation. I'd only worry about the color if I had a perf 16 stamp. There's no worrying about alphabets here, and I think the colors are distinct enough that you have a chance with them. For the large watermarks, I'd next look at the paper. If you see blue, great. Check the perf. There's only one answer for perf 14. Great. For perf 16, you're left with color. All these stamps are die 2, so that won't help. The colors in this group don't at all feel the same, so you might have a chance, but I wouldn't be too confident in an identification of a blued large crown watermark stamp. Finally, we're left with the white paper large watermark stamps. The first problem is it's difficult to be completely confident that you just missed the blue. Look harder for the blue. If you still think it's white paper, check the perforations. In this group, perf 16 is the easy one. If it's perf 14, you're stuck with color identification next, and these are all too similar for me to figure out. Honestly, I'd give up at this point and accept that you've narrowed it down as far as you can. Perhaps you might figure out red-brown or deep rose red. At least you might convince yourself of that. You might check the alphabet and get lucky that you find an alphabet 4 stamp. That might be possible compared to the only other option, alphabet 2. In that case, you'd know you had a rose red stamp, number 42. Oh, and with this group you have the added problem that you still might not have seen that paper color quite right. I wouldn't worry too much about getting these perfect, because the worrying isn't going to get you any closer to right for these stamps. Sorry about that. I'd really love to give you a more definitive approach to how to identify those large crown white paper issues. Perhaps one of you in the audience has a better approach to these and can drop some notes in the comments to teach us all how to do this. Anyway, this was the hardest part of these stamps. Moving forward, I think everything else is pretty clear-cut, mostly clear-cut. So let's go on to the next page. This is the last set of stamps with that penny black design. This group isn't too hard. For these stamps, the design has been changed again. This is where the stars in the upper corners turn into corner letters. This is also a place where 2 new denominations get added to our set. You'll recognize the second and fourth stamps, the penny red and the tuppenny blue. I've mentioned these before for sure. Notice that the stars are replaced with flipped corner letters. There are 2 shades for both of these. The penny red comes in rose red and lake red. Conceptually, I understand the difference. The lake is a darker, almost brick-like color. But in practice, with changes from age, I don't feel confident identifying most of these stamps. Look at my stamps. For my copies, I've just noted them as being either Stanley Gibbons numbers 43 or 44. They are exactly the same price. I'm sure I've got some of each, but really, being precise in this identification doesn't matter to me one bit. The tuppenny blue also comes in 2 shades, blue and deep blue. The regular blue shade comes in both thick line and thin line versions we've covered already. The halfpence and 1.5 stamps were issued to support new postal rates. The halfpence was used for a newly reduced postcard and newspaper rate. The 1.5 covered the reduced rate for printed matter. The colors for these new stamps are quite similar to the penny reds. They're also known with 2 shades, with all the same shade identification issues of the penny red. There's one other oddity for the 1.5. There's an error variety that Stanley Gibbons gives a catalog number to. There's a flaw in one of the plates such that the top corner letters are OP, but the bottom corner letters are P and C. Looking at this example, it sure looks like the bottom right is an O with a chunk taken out of it. That can't be, of course, because the column letters only go as high as L, the 12th letter for the 12-wide sheet of stamps. That's just a wonky C. The error is that the engraver cut an O in the top left corner of plate 1, and nobody noticed it until it was released. I guess this deserves its own catalog number. Each of the stamps on this page have plate numbers engraved on them. I've marked where the plate numbers are on these stamps. The penny red marking is wider because those plate numbers go from 71 to 225, taking up much more space on the stamp. Notice on the top row that I have 5 copies of the penny red. I've labeled those stamps with the odd markings 43/44 plate unknown. Like I said, I don't pay much attention to whether the stamps are 43 or 44. Possibly the first 3 are 44 and the last 2 are 43, but I don't really know. With each of these stamps, I can't tell what the plate number is. It's either covered by the cancel or too faded for me to read. I've put these stamps here, but I've gone a little deeper with these issues, trying to collect examples of all the various plate numbers. That's not at all important to identifying these stamps. I'm telling you that to make sense of the next few pages in my album. Look at all these penny reds. These are all copies of the 4-corner penny red stamps. Still, I don't worry about whether these are rose red or lake red versions, but I try to save the best copy I find for every plate number. Some of these plate numbers are more valuable than others. The Stanley Gibbons catalog has a table of those values. There is the famously rare plate number 77 stamp. There are only 7 or 8 known copies of that stamp, and of course I don't have one of those. This is my second page of plate numbers. And I have a third page to make enough space for all these various plate numbers. I'll point out that some people try to collect all the corner letter combinations, trying to reconstruct an entire plate. That might be fun too. Imagine what it would take to collect every plate position on every plate. That's 154 plates of 240 stamp positions, or 36,728 stamps if you account for the rare plate 77 stamps. Some people collect like that. I don't. Let's move on. We're finally done with all those stamps that look like the penny black design and ready to move on to something new. The previous stamps were called line engraved stamps. This set of stamps is the start of surface printed issues. In line engraving, lines are cut into a metal plate. Those lines hold the ink to be transferred to the paper. For surface printing, the image is on the raised part of a rubber-like roller. The raised part of the roller picks up the ink on the stamp image and presses it onto the paper. All the Victoria stamps going forward would be surface printed. The stamps on this page were released in 1855, which is just before the last of the line engraved stamps, the 4-corner letter stamps. It's a little odd then that the distinguishing feature of these stamps is that there are no corner letters. I put this set here because they fit better stylistically with the other surface printed issue stamps. Stanley Gibbons does the same thing in the catalog, so a collector could be forgiven for missing the order of the release of these stamps. There were 3 denominations in this set, 4p, 6p, and 1 shilling. Notice that there are no corner numbers. I keep harping on that, I know. It'll be important later. Also, scour as you might, you won't find plate numbers on these either. There are 4 different watermarks used with these stamps. The various garter watermarks are used exclusively on the 4p stamp. That's where I'd start identifying that stamp. I focus less on the size of the watermark and more on the details of the watermark. The small one has 3 distinct stripes on the band. The medium one has detail marks throughout. The large one has mostly even segments to it. Once you know the watermark on the 4p, you only need to worry about shades for the medium garter stamp. There is a next level of detail around minor paper differences without specific catalog numbers, but that's too much detail for this video. Both the 6p and 1 shilling stamp use the emblems watermark. There's no reason to check those watermarks unless you want to look for some very rare inverted watermarks or the like. There are multiple shades for each of these stamps, but then again, shades. You know what's possible there. I don't have many of these stamps. I've been lucky to find a few, as all of them are pretty pricey. I've had some good luck in lots I've bought, and I always encourage you to go on treasure hunts. Let's go to my next page. This page also comes chronologically before the four-corner penny reds. Actually, the timeline of the stamps in this period gets a little confusing. What's going on is not the release of sets of stamps yet. Instead, as new denominations are needed, they're released, and the prevailing design style informs the design of the next stamp release. At times, when a new denomination is needed and a new design style is introduced, some existing denominations will be updated to match that new style. On this page, for example, the designs do have the four corner letters. That matches the design style of the current issues. So look at this new set of stamps on the bottom row compared to the stamps on the top row. Both sets have four corner letters, but in the top row the letters are in the color of the stamp, and on the bottom row the letters are in the color of the paper, that is white. Notice also that all the new stamps are augmented denominations to the first set of stamps. So why am I showing the middle set? Well, that came out before the new four corner stamps on the bottom. 3 new needed denominations, the 4p, 6p, and 1 shilling. By the way, the 6p and 1 shilling stamps replaced the embossed stamps, an approach that never really caught on. The postal system was still trying to find its design style. With the next need for new stamps, those on the last row, they went back to the familiar four-corner letter style, with a little twist in how they shaded the letters. Anyway, the 3p stamp served the role of the old 4p stamp and took on the same color carmine as its predecessor. There was still a need for a 4p stamp, so it was redone in shades of red. I know, this one looks orange. The catalog lists these as shades of red or vermilion. Vermilion is a shade of orange-red. Not only does the color change, but the four corner letters are added to this design. Next, the 6p stamp is updated with the new style. A 9p stamp is added with the new style, and the shilling is updated to match too. This bopping around with the corner letters will continue on with minor changes, new colors, and a few denominations for 15 years. This is a key point to understanding how to identify the stamps of this period. Let's look at some examples. The top row shows the evolution of the 4p stamp, 6p on the second row, followed by the 1 shilling stamp on the third row. The 4p stamp starts out with no corner letters, then small white corner letters, then large white corner letters, and finally large colored cornered letters. This is how the catalog sorts these sets, by the type of the corner letters, despite that not being the absolute date order of the stamps. That makes sense to me. It's how I sort my stamps in my album too, as I'm sure most collectors do. Before we finish with the top row of 4p stamps, note that the last 3 stamps are in different colors. I'm sure these changes were for a combination of matching a color to a postal use or making the colors more appealing. Taking a look at the second row, those 6p stamp follow the same pattern. No corner letters, small white, and large colored letters. At the end there, it looks like they really struggled to find the right color for this design. There's another oddity here. There's a design change during the large white letter period. I suspect with that color change, the design looked too similar to the 4p stamp. I'd like to think that the 6-sided hexagonal frame had something to do with the denomination too. In the shilling stamp, the pattern is most obvious. 1 corner type across each of the corner designs, followed by a color change at the end of the run. Neat. So now we're back to my page of the small white corner letter stamps. Hopefully it's easier to understand these in the context now. I've got just 2 of these stamps, the 6p and the 1 shilling. Here's the whole set. There are just 6 designs with these small white corner stamps. At this point they added a 3p and a 9p to the existing design set. During this time, the old halfpence, 1p, 1.5, and 2p were still in use, and those wouldn't be replaced through the whole period of these 4 corner designs. That's a little hard to see from the catalog or from any collections you might come across, which are mostly sorted by the corner design style. Looking at these all together, I think it's obvious how the shape around the Queen's head are related to the denomination. Certainly the new 3 and 9p stamps have 3 and 9 lobes in their frames. Someone probably convinced themselves that the existing 4p stamp was indeed broken into 4 sections by the words around the frame. The 1 shilling naturally has a one-sided oval, although I'm not sure how you could square that thinking with the look of the 4p stamp. Now it makes sense why the 6p stamp was switched to the hexagon. Back on my page again, you see I have just the two copies, Stanley Gibbons number 84 and 90. Let me pop up my table for this set. Note that these stamps have two watermarks also, but you won't need that for identification. But you'll also notice that there are 3 or 4 catalog numbers for each denomination. I haven't spelled those out here. I'm not really sure why, but anyway, most of those are shade differences, some easier to figure out than others. But for each stamp, there's one catalog number for a stamp with a secret mark. These secret marks were the way the printer indicated the plate number that the stamp came from. I'll run through those marks quickly because I think they're interesting. For the 3p, the mark was a dot added to the frame where I've added the blue circles. The enlargements on the top show the stamp without the secret mark. Those are from plate 2. Plate 3 adds the dots, like in the bottom enlargements. The 4p stamp has 2 secret marks, both near the bottom corner letters. On plate 3, there is no plates 1 or 2. On plate 3, there's the Roman numeral 1 next to the bottom letter square. I've circled that in green. Notice on the lower enlargements that there are 2 lines. That's a Roman number 2 for plate 4. Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Also on plate 4, 2 diagonal notches have been added to the bottom corners of those squares. I've circled those in blue on the bottom enlargements. Collectors call those hairlines in case you see that word in a catalog. Both the 6 and 9p stamps add hairlines to their second plate. There are no hairlines on the first plates, and these are simple. The 9 is a little more confusing, but nothing you need to worry too much about. First, there's the hairline in the second plate, but not in the first one. Notice also that there are plate numbers around the ovals around the queen's head, 1 on the left and 2 on the right. Here's the confusing part. The 1 is on plate 2 and the 2 is on plate 3. Of course, you don't need to worry about that detail except that it's fun. There's one catalog number without hairlines labeled plate 1, and a number for the stamp with hairlines that's labeled plate 2. You'll notice in this image that I'm showing a third stamp on top of a K in a circle. This is a printing error that happened in the KD position of plate 2, the one labeled 1. Those stamps show the K in a circle. It's weird, but there isn't a major catalog number for it, unlike the POPC error we saw earlier. Although this one's just as likely as the other one, I have no idea why one stamp gets a major number and the other gets a minor number. All that was the long way to show you that I have 2 stamps on my small white corner letter page. Neither one of them has one of the secret marks. And while there are 5 possible designs on this page, there are 17 catalog numbers for the various shades and plate combinations. I've got a long way to go. This next page has my large white corner letter stamps. I've got a much better start on this page, but of course there is a lot more stamp designs in this set. This is the full set. There are 2 new regular-sized denominations, the 10p and 2 shilling designs. The 10p doesn't seem to have anything 10 about its frame, but the 2 shilling has the double arc border around the queen that matches the pattern we've seen before. With this set, a whole new style of larger stamps has been added. Those are them along the bottom row. There are 3 large format stamps, 5 shilling, 10 shilling, and £1. Then there's the even larger £5 stamp. This stamp design was copied from an existing £5 telegraph stamp. When telegraph stamps went out of use, there was still a need for a £5 stamp, so this was created with the word telegraphs changed to postage. Very few of these stamps were used for postage, though. Most went to pay excise taxes or, oddly, for sending large telegraphs. There would be another set of large format stamps issued a few years later. They're easy to confuse with these stamps, even though they are released after the use of corner number stops. I'll compare the 2 sets a little later. While there are some stamps in this set with multiple catalog numbers, most of these are for various shades and color differences. Thankfully, those are all easy to tell apart. Certainly there is the difference in watermarks. You don't have to worry about the large garter watermark because that is the only watermark the 4p stamp comes in. You won't need to check the watermark for that one. But for all the others, you need to check the watermark. In this image, I'm showing the various watermarks. You're familiar with the large garter. Most of the smaller value stamps have either the familiar emblems watermark or the newer spray watermark. The large values are either that Maltese cross or the anchor, although you won't need to check the watermark for the large £5 stamps. It can only be the anchor. Just for grins, I've included the 2 spellings of the 6p stamp. Early versions included a dash in the spelling. I can't imagine why. None of the other stamps in the series included a dash. The designer apparently made a mistake, and when it was finally noticed, it was fixed to the version without the dash. This is also the series where the design on the sixpence stamp changed from the circle frame to the hexagonal frame. Those are the ones that came in the updated colors. Finally, even though I don't have any of the higher value large format stamps, each of those come in 2 shades of paper. On the top, I'm showing the blued paper. Don't adjust your screen, the paper doesn't look blue. This is similar to the bluish paper on some early US stamps. The paper actually looks grayish to me. The bottom shows the white paper, which is brightly white in comparison. Honestly, I wouldn't worry about this distinction. If you're getting one of these stamps, you're going to want better help identifying it than this video. I hope you do. Next, we move to my page for the colored corner letters. Something in my brain trips up with these. For some reason, when I look at these, I see the letter and I see the color, but I have a hard time noticing whether the letter is a color or the background is a color. Obviously, I can see that difference, but it's not a difference that my brain pays much attention to. My point is, if you're like me, you may need to be deliberate when you're identifying these stamps. I've made a few mistakes as I've gone along the way. I have a few of the lower value issues of these stamps. It's barely a start. Let's look at the full set. This is the full set of these colored corner letter stamps. Well, almost. Notice that new 1-pound stamp at the bottom. That's a white corner letter. It makes no sense from a design standpoint. It was released around the same time as the other high-value stamps on the bottom row. Maybe the designer had the same brain confusion I have with these, no matter. That bottom row of stamps was released 3 years after the stamps above them. The catalog doesn't list them with this set, and I don't put them on this page with the others, even if I had one. Let's make them go away for now and focus on the regular size stamps. We'll come back to them later. That feels better. With this design change, the new denominations are the 2.5 pence and the 8 pence. Except for the new colors, these are all the same stamps as before, with the colors of the corner letters swapped. I haven't done any research for the specific reasons for the various color changes. If you know any of those details, drop them into the comments for everyone to learn from. I will mention the 2 odd stamps at the bottom with the surcharges. They're odd because they're surcharged with the same value that's already on the stamp. That feels like a bit of a waste. First, look at the 3 pence stamp. The design is the same as the 3 pence stamp on the top row, but the ink colors changed to lilac. The postal system started noticing a problem with the cancels being washed off of stamps and being reused. To combat that, they experimented with an ink that would wash away when the stamp was washed. Those inks are called fugitive inks, and at the time the only inks they had for this were the lilac color and a light green color. In practice, the words of the denomination on these stamps were a little hard to read in this light lilac color, so the postal system overprinted them with these bolder denominations to solve that problem. These oddities were replaced the next year by another set of stamps with fugitive inks. Before that change, though, and even a little before those oddly surcharged stamps were released, the postal system finally updated those early low-value line-engraved designs. Each of those early stamp designs were replaced, plus a 5-cent stamp was added for the first time. Notice that the 1-pence stamp, sometimes called the penny Venetian red, doesn't have the same design style as the others. The Venetian red has colored corner letters and might rightly said to be part of the earlier set, although it's usually sorted with these stamps. The rest of the stamps all have a triangular sawtooth pattern in the outer frame, additionally setting them apart from the Venetian red. No matter, the Venetian red was a short-lived design. It came out in 1880, and a year later, stamps were made valid for both postage and revenue. Notice that all these stamps say postage. The Venetian red was replaced in just 1 year with the penny lilac stamp, which would remain the 1-pence stamp through the rest of the Queen's life. Over 30 billion of these stamps were issued. Notice that I'm showing 2 penny lilac stamps here, and that's because there are 2 versions of this stamp. It's a subtle difference for sure, but important one for rarity. The stamp was initially released with 14 dots in each corner of the frame. Just 6 months later, the 16-dot design was released, staying in use for about 10 years. Naturally, the 16-dot design is far more common. On my page, I've got a few decent stamps. I'm missing the halfpence stamp and the 2 and 5 pence stamps on the top row, but on the second row, I've got all the variants of the penny lilac stamp. That's 2 shades of the 14-dot version and 3 shades of the 16-dot version. I'm happy with this progress so far. This next page is blank for me. It's the page for the new designs of the high-value stamps. In this image, the top row shows the older high-value stamps for comparison. I don't have any of those either. People, those all go for hundreds and thousands of dollars. The second row is the new designs. The new designs lean towards the colored corner letter style compared to the white corner letter style of the previous design. The corner letters of the 1 pound stamp is an anomaly I really can't explain. This set adds a 2 shilling 6 pence design. The 5 shilling design is visually similar to the previous design, although there are a number of other obvious differences. For some reason, the 10 shilling is completely different from the old 10 shilling stamp, and the 1 pound stamp is a total divergence from the previous approach except in color, and it's even a little shorter than the 5 pound stamp that the new shape evokes. The shilling values for these new designs also come in both the blue and white paper varieties. The white paper versions also have 2 shades. Looking back at the first row of stamps, the earlier designs, I think it's easy to see which have the blued paper and which are on the white paper. I still don't see blue though. Finally, there are 2 versions of the brown 1 pound stamp. The first uses a crown watermark, and the second uses what's called an orb watermark. That's the ball with a cross on the top on the far right. I think this picture's as close as I'm ever going to get to getting these stamps. Hang in there, we've got just 2 more sets in the Victorian era. On this page we have a set of stamps that are mostly lilac and green with that fugitive ink I mentioned earlier. Finding used copies of these in good condition can be hard. Over time the ink does become more permanent, but soaking the stamp off paper can ruin it. If you get one on paper, I'd recommend you keep it on paper rather than risk fading the stamp. You can see how faded some of my copies are. I have a fair number of these. Notice that most of my copies are faded badly from soaking. I didn't soak them. My 2.5 pence stamp, though, is quite nice. These are the new stamps that came out with this set starting in 1883. When I lay them out in groups of 5 like this, it looks almost like it was planned. That first stamp, though, doesn't quite fit with the others, does it? At least it doesn't have the colors or corner letters like the others. In fact, the design might look familiar. This is the previous color of the stamp, this green. It was reissued in blue, in part because the green colors were being used for the higher value stamps. I can't figure out why they didn't reissue it in the lilac shade of the other lower value stamps. And now we come to the last series of stamps featuring Queen Victoria. These are called the Jubilee issues in honor of her 50th year as Queen. These would be the stamps for the last 4 years of her reign, with her successor, Edward VII, largely copying the designs of these stamps in his first stamp issues. I have a fair number of these stamps. Of all the Victoria stamps, these are the most recent, most plentiful, and least expensive. You'll notice on my page that I have what appears to be a number of duplicates. There are a couple of reasons for this. The first one I want you to care about is this 2 pence green and scarlet. There are 2 official catalog numbers for this stamp. These are simply different shades. The first one is valuable, the second one not so much. A few of the others are shade differences too. The halfpenny vermilion orange, it comes in 2 shades, but only one has a main catalog number. The second is 197E. The way the catalog is laid out, this looks like a main catalog number, and you might consider it a main catalog number if you want, I guess. Next, those 4.5 and 6 pence stamps are minor shade differences in the catalog. Now, I don't want you to think that a minor shade difference is irrelevant for these issues. In most cases, the minor shade differences in this set make a big difference in price. And since people don't get many of these stamps, it can be hard to notice one shade from another. That's also true because some of these shade differences could be mistaken as a faded stamp. My advice on these is to save all the copies you're lucky enough to get until you have enough that you get a better instinct for these shades. There are minor treasures to be had that way. There's one other pair I want to point out, those 2 5 pence stamps on the 3rd row. They look like shade differences to me, but they aren't listed. There's a similar pair of shade differences on the bottom row. I'm holding both these pairs because I want to do some more research on those shades in the specialized catalog. I just haven't got there yet, and I'm taking my own advice about saving them for now. There's one other interesting thing about those 5-pence stamps. They are both copies of minor catalog version 207A. There are two versions of this stamp. The stamp on the left is the major catalog stamp, Stanley Gibbons 207. The one on the right is the minor catalog number, 207A. On the regular stamp, the background lines by the D in the value form a series of little squares. In the minor catalog stamp, they form a series of little dashes. Both my copies of the 5-pence stamp are 207A, which you might think means I have two copies of the rarer stamp. If so, you'd be wrong. This is one of the rare cases where the variant stamp is more common than the main catalog number stamp. Stamp 207 catalog is used for about £120. In today's conversion, that's $160. On the other hand, 207A catalogs for £15, which is currently about $20. In practice, that means you can buy one for under $2. Here's the full set unused. These are much more elaborate stamps, although it's still the same image of the Queen from 47 years earlier. She never aged, I guess, except in Canada. This is a Jubilee stamp from Canada, so apparently she did age somewhere. The half-pence stamp is an interesting one to start with, although it doesn't seem to match the style of the others. Well, does it look familiar? The two stamps on the first row are the earlier designs. While the new stamp on the bottom rows aren't identical, they certainly bear a strong family resemblance. When we get back to the Jubilee issues, you might notice that all the portraits of the Queen are smaller on those stamps. I suspect these were changed to be more in line with the size of the Queen on those other stamps. I should note that there are two colors for this stamp. It was first released in the vermilion color, that's the orange one. 5 years later, this same stamp would be released in the blue-green color. That was to make it come into compliance with new UPU regulations. Now look on the third row, second from the end. When the half-pence stamp changed to blue-green, the postal system worried that the new color would conflict with the existing green 1 shilling stamp. That's why the 1 shilling stamp was changed to its new color scheme. It's the one right next to it, green and carmine. I really like that stamp. Across the rest of this series, I particularly like the stamps that came on colored paper, the 2.5, 3, and 6-pence stamps. I'm also a fan of the various 2-color stamps, both in these and in the Edward VII versions. These are the first 2-colored stamps of Great Britain, a really nice start in my opinion. Also notice the £1 stamp is green. Let's compare that to the previous high-valued stamp releases. The Jubilee stamp in green is just a reissue of the previous stamp in brown. The brown stamp came out the year before the Jubilee stamps, along with the other stamps in its row. It's not considered a Jubilee stamp. The green stamp is considered a Jubilee stamp, but that doesn't make any sense to me. I can't find out why they made this color change. This stamp came out 5 years after the first Jubilee stamp, but since the Jubilee stamps are seen as the last set with Victoria on them, well, this stamp then gets sorted with those Jubilee stamps. As it turns out, and thankfully for the run length of this video, this £1 green stamp is the last Victorian postage stamp issued by Great Britain, and the last we're going to cover today. Yeah, that was a long episode, I know. Hopefully it's a good reference for you when you get some of these stamps. They really aren't that hard, but there are some subtleties that you have to pay attention to. And since these stamps don't find their way into my collection very often, I have to wrestle with these details every time I get a new one. Hopefully this video will be there to help you when you get one of these stamps, help you wrestle those differences down too. Anyway, happy collecting.